Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Monday, March 2nd, 2020. Here are our top stories. Market stresses on our colleges and universities, and rising endowments, but clouds may be on the horizon. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Rick Seltzer. He's an editor with Inside Higher Ed. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to see you as always, and great to talk a little bit about higher education. So let's talk about some reporting you did around the market stresses that many colleges and universities are feeling today. This is a really important topic, and we've talked about this at some length before.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at this particular moment in time. You have several colleges announcing significant changes, whether that is closure at Concordia University Portland was announced within the last few weeks. They'll be closing at the end of the fall semester. Some other examples like Florida, you have lawmakers pushing a bill that would actually fold some of the smaller public colleges in that state into larger public colleges or university systems. And generally just a lot of concern about the financial future of this sector. By and large, the concern is focused first and foremost on small private colleges, like that Concordia University Portland example that I gave. And there's been a lot of discussion about how do we find out who is at risk? How do we determine the places that are most likely to either close or struggle mightily so that students are well informed and also so that leaders have the information they need to be able to make good decisions, to figure out what pressure points to push. And if the day comes when a closure or wind down or merger is necessary, how do they do it in an orderly fashion?
But
unfortunately, there's also a lot of hand-wringing over exactly what the right metrics are. There's a long history in higher education of trying to figure out the best way to evaluate finances. And depending on who you ask, it is rightly or wrongly considered a very difficult sector to evaluate. We could go back years and run through various attempts to develop a metric, but one of the recent really interesting efforts came out in a book. It's called The College Stress Test. It's from a group of higher ed insiders, including one at Penn, Robert Zemsky, who's the lead author, who he runs a program that effectively turns out some of the leaders who are presidents at these places that are considered at risk of closure. And so what they did is went back and said, okay, we have all these examples of scores that have been fought, of financial viability scores that have been picked apart. However, we also just did this big project looking at law schools. The law school market had a shakeout a few years ago. So how can we take what we learned and do better, essentially? And depending on who you ask in the sector, the book is either a great effort or a little disappointing because they developed this financial stress test. And I can tell you some of the factors that go into it, but the controversial thing is they actually did not release a list of institutions that stress test turned. So they talked about instead the types of institutions that are there, some of the strategies for overcoming them. And they actually, at the back of the book, released a whole appendix. You can calculate it yourself using publicly available data. They just did not take that step. So a little controversial over whether they should have put it out or not. I think the higher ed sector generally is happier that they didn't. And we're all waiting and or trying to find time to run the numbers ourselves.
So Rick, $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. The cost of education continues to go up. When you look at the financial stresses, you're getting a lot of money from these students, a lot of them taking on new debt. What the matching liabilities, where does it come from? Is it paying these professors too much, too many administrators? I mean, any thoughts from the book? Any thoughts there?
Sure. So the book identified after that giant fight or long history of fighting, the book identified essentially what I think you would expect to be the biggest predictors of financial stress. It is declining first-year enrollment, your freshmen who are then in your pipeline for 4 years, and then increasing the sticker price or the market price you're attempting to charge. over about a decade span. And it's the slope of the line more so than a single year up or down, increase or decrease. Your question on cost is a great one. I think it's one that the sector increasingly has to start asking. There is a lot that goes into it. Sometimes it may be faculty salaries, but a lot of these institutions that are most on the brink have actually been cutting faculty or not adding as many tenured faculty and moving more towards adjunct to a short-term contracts and do not typically cost quite as much as your tenured faculty member, at least over time. So you also have kind of this incentive or this feeling need to invest in certain services. The top of the market is really building out campuses or putting new amenities in for students or just, kind of getting splashy or really attractive educational programs. The bottom of the market has to try to keep up. Otherwise, what student who can pay a decent amount of tuition is going to want to go there? I think it's a system of incentives is kind of driving costs or has been driving costs to rise all throughout the system. What's kind of interesting is if you actually look at these places that are at the margin or potentially going to feel stress, a lot of them have not been able to net more in net tuition revenue over the last several years. I think you're seeing the consumer kind of say, no, we're not going to either be willing to or able to take on more debt, and we're not going to finance this in different ways.
Yeah, and Rick, we did this story, you and I, we talked about your story around 2-year colleges versus 4-year colleges. Consumers are getting really attentive to some of these statistics, and I think that's part of it. But we've got about a minute and a half left. I want to get your perspective. And what does this mean for the future of the American education system, the higher education system? Because, what I'm hearing from you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is I'm hearing consolidation or elimination of certain universities. And what does that mean for students? So what's the future of our education system?
Yeah, I think it's a moment when everyone is wondering that. I do think that the prognostications about it completely collapsing or looking like something entirely different in 5 years are probably a little overblown. The Zemsky book says that about 1 in 10 colleges face substantial market risk, and that another 3 in 10 are going to be kind of stuck in a stressed level for a long time. That feels about right to me based on everything I've seen. Somebody asked me a couple days ago, well, are there going to be more closures? And I gave kind of an offhand response. Well, the question isn't whether there will be, it's how many more there will be. I still think that's true. The real concern is, you look at all the data, students still tend to go to college within 50 or 100 miles of home, overwhelmingly. And the places that are under the most stress are oftentimes in markets that are saturated, but occasionally they're in markets that have one small private college within that 50 to 100 mile radius. I think we really need to wonder about the educational opportunities and the capacity to get a bachelor's degree for those students, the ones who are not going to have other options.
Yeah, and Rick, I'm going to go to break, but just one comment I'll make is I always worry about those small college towns, that if the college goes away, what happens to the town? Because the town is almost like a boom town from the old West days, right? It comes up around the community, and if the college goes away, what's left? So Rick, I'm going to hold you over. When we come back, we're going to talk to Rick about endowments. He did some reporting on this, both from the wealth tax perspective, but also endowment return. So you're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
The windows on our homes, they protect us and the ones we love, but they do much more. At Renewal by Andersen, making your home more comfortable is at the center of every window we make. It's why we custom build our windows in America and install them in as little as 1 day. It's why we build our frames with exclusive FIBREX composite material that's 2 times stronger than vinyl. It's why our glass helps keep your home warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and quieter all year long. It's why we stand behind every window with a 20-year limited warranty. Why not help lower your energy costs while giving your home and family the best? Call 1-800-835-6525 to schedule a free in-home consultation. Buy one, get one at 40% off with this special offer. Plus, get special financing with no money down, no monthly payments, and no interest for 1 full year. Renewal by Andersen, the better way to a better window. Call 1-800-835-6525 now.
Welcome back. We're talking to Rick Seltzer. He's an editor with Inside Higher Ed. Rick, thanks so much for sticking around with us this morning.
Hey, thank you.
Well, it's great conversation about the financial stresses around colleges and universities. Let's shift gears and talk about endowments, and a lot going on here that I want to get into. You wrote several pieces because you're always writing, but you wrote a piece around endowment returns. I think it was back in January. What can you tell us about these returns?
Yeah, it is busy season for endowments. You're absolutely right. Every year, the National Association of College and University Business Officers puts out it's actually kind of a media preview to a report they put out a couple months later that looks at what happened with endowment returns in the previous fiscal year. And what they found in 2019 was across the board throughout their survey universe, I believe was about 800 to 900 respondents. They found a 5.3% return. That's net, I believe, of fees. That is down a little bit from the last 2 years. It was 8.2 in 18 and 12.2 in 2017. And so that caused a little bit of hand-wringing about what's going on with long-term returns. Are they going to be lower? Are institutions going to be able to keep up the spending rates that they would like to be able to keep up? Because typically what you'll see is the recommendation is, I believe it's somewhere between a 4 to 6% endowment draw. So you want to have your returns match that. A lot of variation.
At least.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of variation within that 5.3% average, though. Larger institutions, smaller institutions, different types. They slice it all different ways. But I think the top line number is kind of the one to keep in mind going forward. Keeping an eye on what it is and what it does to the 10-year return.
Yeah, and Rick, you also wrote a piece, and I think this is related back to the tax bill that passed, not this past year, but the previous year, can't get it out, around wealth tax or an endowment tax. And many universities, especially those on the more wealthier side, are literally complaining about this tax. And what can you tell us there?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this topic because there was so much attention lavished on it right after the 2017 tax reform bill passed. And an interesting point is that even though the study we just talked about looked at fiscal year 2019, it did not include any discussion of this endowment tax. It was essentially deemed too new, and the tax bills actually generally aren't coming due until the fall of 2019 and after. Mm-hmm. So the association effectively said, we'll deal with it next year. I, however, was kind of curious what early returns would be because we saw some really splashy numbers. Harvard reported I think it was like a $38 million tax bill or endowment tax bill as part of a larger $50 million tax bill tied to the tax reform of 2017. And so I was looking for a group of institutions that was proven to be engaged, not necessarily the ones that are most likely to pay, but the ones that have proven were worried about this. And fortunately, 49 of them had signed a letter in 2018 urging Congress to repeal this tax, which, quick aside, and I apologize for all the asides here, it is technically not just a tax on endowments. It is a 1.4% excise tax on, I believe it's all net investment income. So theoretically, there could be some income from other sources that are not endowed sources tax. Anyway,
Yeah,
apologies for that aside. I do like to make the point. Anyway, I attempted to poll these 49 institutions beginning in December and then through January, just to get a sense of how much they were paying, what the check was that they were actually writing. And only 15 either responded to me or were putting it in their audited financial statements or had released their financial statements to the point where I could find a number. A lot of variation within what exactly they were reporting. So I got probably 10 or so to actually tell me the size of the check they wrote to the feds. But even that may change because some of the rules for what exactly is taxed and not taxed are not finalized yet. A lot of squishiness there. A few other institutions, you could find it in their financial statements. And then you had the places like Harvard and Stanford that were reporting these really, really big bills. Stanford, I think, was about $43 million. The thing about the number that Stanford reported is it's not actually what they're sending to the Treasury this year. And it's not exactly played up in the materials that they've released or the press reports right now. But as best as I can tell, it's the amount that they expect to have to pay if they were to cash out all of their capital gains this year. So it's the liability, it's not necessarily the check.
right.
So I have some kind of descriptive statistics for the group throwing out kind of those outliers at Stanford, at Harvard, in case Harvard's doing the same thing with the reporting. And from what I can tell of the remaining group, you've got roughly 11 with a median tax bill that they're paying of about 1.3 million. And the largest of that range was about 7.5 million, the smallest being about 250.
Wow. So this is definitely additive to the financial stresses we talked about in the prior segment. Real quick, I want to spend the last 2 minutes, Rick, talking about divestment.
Yeah.
This is, we're talking about endowments, we're talking about the wealth tax. There's a movement, there continues to be a movement, because this is not new, where student groups, outside groups are interested in more sustainable investing. And what can you tell us from your reporting about that particular topic? Because this is something that is growing not only in higher education, but in other sectors of the economy.
Definitely. Right now in the higher ed space, it has gotten the most attention as it pertains to your divesting from fossil fuels. I think there is a little bit of a move to push endowments to consider more ESG factors, your governance, your social factors that are not just fossil fuel divestment. There is a lot of discussion right now about whether boards or investment committees that run endowments can fulfill their fiduciary duties and divest from either fossil fuels or take some of these other ESG factors into consideration. It's not unlike what you're seeing in the broader ESG movement. So there have been a couple of studies that have come out in the last couple of months. They're still in the early phases, but effectively what they've argued or what they've shown or arguably shown is that you can take into account ESG factors or divest from fossil fuels. And within the last, I believe it's 5 or 10 years, you could still do about as well as you would do if you hadn't done them. I think it is still an open question as to whether those past results reflect future returns, right? But
Always.
Exactly. But at very least, the kind of argument that these advocates are making is that this shows that you can discuss it. You can be a good fiduciary and take this into account. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's worth talking about. I think you need to talk about all aspects of it: how you preserve the environment, how you make sure that you have the right securities in your portfolio that have appropriate governance, and also talking about benchmarking and due diligence. All those things have to be discussed because you don't want to jump into something without knowing how to measure it. Well, Rick, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Appreciate your perspective. Lots going on in higher education, fortunately and unfortunately, but it's always good talking with you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, Rick. Always a pleasure seeing you and getting your perspective. And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found it educational and entertaining all at the same time. Have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Attention! The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has officially authorized new benefits that Medicare Advantage plans may include. To get the benefits you deserve, you can call the Medicare Coverage Helpline.
Hi, I'm Joe Namath. If you're on Medicare, this is important information. I called the Medicare Coverage Helpline and they instantly looked up my coverage. In this one simple call, they offered to enroll me in a plan that includes rides to medical appointments, private home aides, doctors and nurses' visits by telephone, and even home-delivered meals. The plan also includes dental, vision, hearing, and prescription drug coverage, all at no additional cost.
Don't delay. Call to see if the new benefits are available in your area.
Call the number on your screen now. It's free.
Call 1-800-757-1451. That's 1-800-757-1451.